Have you ever sat down at a nice restaurant and noticed something strange about the silverware? The fork is sitting on your left, the knife and spoon are on your right, and there always seems to be more cutlery than you actually need for the meal. You may have wondered, why is the fork on the left? Is there a real reason for it? Or is it just an old habit that nobody bothers to question anymore? In this episode of The Lost History of Everyday Things, we are exploring the story behind that simple piece of table setting and the surprising amount of history packed into it. If you enjoy this video, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. The short answer is that the fork sits on the left because of the way people have traditionally eaten with a knife in their dominant hand. For most of history, that meant the right hand. The knife on the right made it easy to cut food, and the fork on the left was used to steady the food while cutting, then switched over or used to bring food to the mouth, depending on the country and the era. Over time, this small practical arrangement turned into a rule, and that rule eventually turned into etiquette. What started as a simple convenience for cutting meat became something people were taught to follow without ever really asking why. To understand it fully, it helps to go back a few centuries. Forks were not always part of the table. For a very long time, people in Europe ate with their hands, a knife, and maybe a spoon. The fork did not become common at the table until sometime around the 1600s, and even then, it was considered unusual or even a little fussy by some people. It took a long time for the fork to be accepted as a normal eating utensil rather than a strange foreign habit. Once it was accepted, table setting slowly became more formal, especially among wealthy families who wanted their dinners to feel elegant and structured. As dining became more of a performance of status, the placement of every utensil started to matter. This is where the modern rules of table setting really took shape. In a formal table setting, the fork goes on the left side of the plate, the knife goes on the right with the blade facing inward toward the plate, and the spoon sits to the right of the knife. The napkin is usually placed either under the fork or on top of the plate, folded neatly. Glasses go above the knife, and any additional silverware is arranged in the order it will be used, starting from the outside and working inward as the meal progresses. So if there is a salad course before the main course, the salad fork sits further to the left than the dinner fork, because it will be used first. The same goes for the soup spoon being placed on the outside if soup comes before the main dish. This outside-in approach is one of the most basic rules of formal table setting, and once you know it, a complicated-looking table suddenly makes a lot more sense. It is worth saying clearly that table setting like this is not something most people are born knowing. If a person did not grow up in a wealthy household, they may not have ever learned table setting at all, and that is not a flaw in that person. It is simply a reflection of how this kind of etiquette has historically been passed down. Formal table manners were often taught in upper-class households, sometimes through finishing schools, governesses, or simply by example at dinners that followed a strict structure every single night. Families without access to that kind of environment usually were not exposed to multiple forks, charger plates, or place cards because their daily meals did not require that level of formality. This means that knowing which fork to use first or where the butter knife belongs is less about intelligence or sophistication and more about exposure and practice. Anyone can learn it with a little explanation, but it is simply not knowledge that everyone has had the chance to pick up. Beyond the fork and knife, there are a lot of other small details that make up full table etiquette. The napkin, for example, is meant to be placed on your lap as soon as you sit down or shortly after the host does the same. If you need to step away from the table during the meal, the polite thing to do is to leave your napkin on your chair, not on the table, since placing it on the table is traditionally a signal that you are finished eating. Elbows are traditionally kept off the table while food is being served or eaten, although many people relax this rule once the meal is mostly finished and conversation takes over. Reaching across another person's plate is considered impolite, and so is starting to eat before everyone at the table has been served, especially in more formal settings. These rules were never about being rigid for the sake of it. They were originally meant to help a group of people share a meal smoothly, without confusion, mess, or awkward moments. There is also etiquette around how utensils are used once the meal has started. In what is sometimes called the American style, a person may cut their food with the fork in the left hand and knife in the right, then switch the fork to the right hand to eat. In what is sometimes called the European or continental style, the fork stays in the left hand the entire time, even while eating, with the tines often facing downward. Neither style is wrong, but they do come from different traditions, and noticing which one someone uses can sometimes hint at where they learned their table manners. When you are finished eating, the classic signal is to place your knife and fork together on the plate, usually at an angle, rather than leaving them scattered or pointing in different directions. Small gestures like this were designed to silently communicate information to a server or host without anyone needing to say a word. Of course, all of this raises an honest question. How much of this still matters in everyday life? The truth is that proper table setting may be disappearing from modern culture, and there are some clear reasons why. Life has gotten faster, families are busier, and many meals are no longer treated as a sit-down event with multiple courses and matching silverware. Instead, food is often eaten quickly between activities, picked up on the way somewhere, or eaten directly out of the container it was cooked or delivered in. Even when people do sit down to eat, many households now eat in the den or living room while watching television rather than gathering at a formal dining table. A coffee table, a couch, and a screen have replaced the dining room table in a lot of homes, especially for everyday meals that are not tied to a holiday or special occasion. This is not necessarily a bad thing, since lifestyles change for very understandable reasons, but it does mean that fewer people grow up practicing traditional table setting on a regular basis, simply because the setting itself does not come up that often anymore. Holidays and special occasions are often the only time many people still encounter a full formal table setting, complete with multiple forks, folded napkins, and assigned seating. Thanksgiving dinners, weddings, and fancy restaurant visits have become some of the last places where these older rules are still expected or noticed. This is part of why some people feel a little nervous or unsure when they are suddenly faced with 3 forks and 2 glasses at a formal dinner. It is not because they lack manners in general. It is simply because that specific kind of table setting has slowly become rare in daily life. Etiquette experts and certain cultural traditions continue to teach these skills, often through cooking classes, etiquette courses, or family traditions that are intentionally passed down. But for many people, this knowledge is no longer something absorbed automatically just by growing up. Even with all of these changes, the basic reason the fork sits on the left has never really changed. It traces back to right-handed cutting, an old system designed to make eating with multiple utensils efficient and orderly. Everything else, from napkin folding to glass placement to which utensil goes where, grew outward from that one simple starting point. Etiquette, in many ways, is really just a long-running attempt to make shared meals feel smooth, respectful, and comfortable for everyone at the table. Whether or not a person follows every rule perfectly does not change the kindness behind the original idea, which was simply to make dining together a little easier and a little more pleasant. So the next time you sit down at a table with a fork on your left and a knife on your right, remember that this small detail carries centuries of history behind it. It is not just a random arrangement of metal utensils. It is a quiet leftover of old habits, social customs, and centuries of people figuring out the easiest and most respectful way to share a meal together. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the lost history of everyday things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.